They laughed at her before she had both feet off the coach step. Marta Vane heard it plain, the snort from the men outside the Dry Fork Mercantile, the woman behind the post office window who put a hand to her mouth, the boy who called out, "That the mail order? Reuben Cade got cheated." And she gathered her carpetbag against her chest and kept her chin level, because she had learned long ago that the one thing they could not take from you, if you refused to hand it over, was the way you carried yourself. She was tall and raw-boned, with a strong, plain face and hands too big for a lady's, and she knew exactly what she was not. She had known it every day of her 29 years. She had not expected the town to announce it to the street. Reuben Cade heard it too, from where he stood by his wagon in his good Sunday shirt, and he felt the old slow heat climb the back of his neck, not at her, at them. He had ridden in expecting a woman off the coach and a quiet word before the preacher. He had not expected the whole loafing population of Dry Fork to turn out to gawk at the horse rancher who'd sent away for a bride, and in their telling, gotten stuck with the plainest one in the territory. He crossed to her through the laughter, a lean, weathered man who moved like he had all the time in the world, and he took the carpetbag out of her arms before she could stop him. "Miss Vane," he said, loud enough to carry, "I'm Reuben Cade. You're better looking than your letters let on, and your letters were the best written I ever got." He set the bag in the wagon bed. "Anybody here got business with my wife-to-be can bring it to me directly. Otherwise, I expect you've all got someplace to be." The laughing thinned. Marta looked at him, really looked, for the first time, and found a face that was not handsome either, sun-cured and stubbled, with a nose that had been broken and a pair of steady gray eyes that were not laughing at all. "You needn't have said that," she told him, low, as he handed her up. "I don't need shielding from the truth. I own a mirror." "Wasn't shielding you from anything," Reuben said, climbing up beside her and gathering the reins. "I said what I saw. If the town can't see it, that's a poverty in the town, not in you." He clicked to the team. "Your letters said you were raised with horses. That true? Or the kind of thing folks put in letters?" "It's true," Marta said. "My father broke and traded them till he died. I did the gentling. I've a hand for the nervous ones." She said it flat, no boast in it, and something in Reuben Cade settled, because he had spent good money and a winter of letters on the chance that this exact thing was true, and he could hear that it was. The Cade place sat in the good grass country north of Dry Fork, a low sound house and a long horse barn, and 40 head of bloodstock grazing the bottoms. And it was, Marta saw at once, a working man's ranch run thin for want of a second pair of hands. They were married 2 days later in the front room by a preacher who kept his eyes politely elsewhere, with the housekeeper and a hired boy for witnesses, and if it was not the wedding a girl dreams of, Marta had stopped dreaming that particular dream a long time back, and she found she did not miss it. Reuben gave her his mother's thin gold band, and said the words plain and meant them, and that was more than she had ever thought to have. The first days were quiet and careful, 2 grown strangers learning the shape of each other across a supper table. Reuben was not a talker, and Marta had spent a lifetime being talked over, and so between them there grew a kind of comfortable silence that neither had expected, and both came to prize. She rose before him and had the coffee on. He came in from the barn with his hat off at the door. They divided the work without discussion, each drawn to the piece the other left. She mended the pasture fence he had let go while the housekeeper was sick and never mentioned it. He noticed the fence and never mentioned it either, only left, the next morning, a good pair of leather gloves sized for her big hands on the wash bench where she'd find them. She wore them till they were black with use. It was not courting. Neither of them would have known how. But it was something, and it was growing, and both of them felt it and neither dared say so. There was one hard night early on, when a cold rain came through, and a mare down in the bottoms went into a bad foaling. The foal turned wrong, and Reuben and Marta worked side by side in the mud and lantern light for 3 hours to save them both. When at last the wet foal drew its first breath and the mare turned to nose it, Marta sat back on her heels in the muck, soaked and shaking and grinning like a girl, and Reuben looked at her across the lantern and thought, with a plainness that startled him, that he had never seen anyone finer. He did not say it. He handed her his own dry coat off his back, and she took it, and they walked up to the house in the rain, not touching but close. And something between them had changed, and would not change back. She earned her place inside a week, and she earned it in the one currency Dry Fork could not argue with. There was a blood-bay stallion in the far paddock that Reuben had bought cheap, because no man could get near him. A beautiful, ruined animal that had been broken wrong and hard by someone before, and would let no one close without striking. Reuben had meant to warn her off it. He came out at first light on the fourth morning to find her already inside the fence. His heart went up into his throat. He did not shout. A shout would have set the horse off. He only came to the rail slow, and gripped it white-knuckled, and made himself watch. Marta was not doing anything. That was the thing of it. She stood a long way off from the stallion, with her back half to him, doing some small task with a bucket, humming low, paying the animal no mind at all, and the horse, ears flat, was watching her with everything it had. She never once approached it. She let it approach her, over the better part of an hour, one suspicious step at a time, until at last it stretched its ugly scarred neck out and lipped at the grain in her open palm, and she still did not turn, and still did not grab, and Reuben understood he was watching something close to a gift. He was beat, Marta said quietly, when the horse had wandered off and she came to the rail. Her face was wet, and she did not trouble to hide it. You can read the whole of it in how he moves. Somebody took a fine thing and taught it that hands mean pain. You can't argue a horse out of that. You can only be, day after day, the hands that don't. She wiped her face with the back of a big, capable wrist. Takes a long while. Costs you a lot of mornings. But he'll come round, Mr. Cade. He only wants somebody to be patient enough to be worth trusting. Reuben Cade looked at his plain, raw-boned wife standing there with grain dust on her sleeves and tears drying on her strong face, and he thought that he had never in his life heard anything truer said about horses or about people, and that the town of Dry Fork, laughing on its store porch, did not know the first thing about what it was looking at when it looked at her. Word of the bay got around, the way things do in horse country. By fall, men who had laughed at the coach step were riding out to the Cade place with their own ruined animals. The biters, the strikers, the ones gone sour under bad hands, and hat in hand asking, half shamed, whether Cade's wife might have a look. Marta had a look. She took their spoiled horses and their spoiled fees, and she gave them back weeks later gentled and willing, and she never once said a word about the coach step to any of them, which shamed them worse than anything she could have said. One rancher's wife, who had covered her mouth and laughed loudest at the coach that first day, came out herself one afternoon with a sour-tempered mare and stood twisting her bonnet strings until Marta gentled the beast in front of her, and then said, quietly, that she was sorry for the laughing, that she'd been a fool. Marta only handed her the mended lead rope and said the horse was a good one and had only wanted understanding, and let the woman decide for herself whether they were still speaking of the mare. Reuben watched it happen and said nothing either. He only noticed that his ranch was making money it had never made, and that his wife hummed while she worked, and that the sound of it had become the thing he listened for coming in from the range. The reckoning came at the autumn horse fair in Dry Fork, and it came from Vance Sturgill, who owned the big spread west of town and had a mouth on him and a matched pair of carriage grays he was fool proud of. Sturgill had lost money that season to the Cade place. His own men had started sending horses to Marta, and he had drunk enough at the fair to want it back some other way. He found the Cades by the sale pens with half the town in earshot. "Cade," Sturgill said loud. "Heard your wife's the horse witch now. Funny. Whole town remembers when she was just the ugliest bride the coach ever brought in." He grinned around at the crowd. "A man's got to squint hard to bet a face like that. What'd she cost you? Mail order? They give a discount on the homely ones?" The porch crowd's silence came down hard. Reuben Cade went very still. But before he could move, and he was moving, Marta put her big steady hand flat on his chest and stepped forward herself. "Mr. Sturgill," she said, and her voice carried, calm as still water. "You've a pretty pair of grays behind you. Bought, I'd wager, for how they'd look to other men. That's the whole of what you know about a horse, and I think it's the whole of what you know about a woman, too." She looked him up and down, unhurried. My husband didn't send for a face. He sent for a hand that horses trust, and a woman who'd carry her own weight and his. And that's what stepped off the coach, and he was the only man on that street with the eyes to see it. You called him cheated. Everything I've built him since says otherwise, and every man here who's got a sound horse home because of me knows it. She let that sit. You want to talk about worth, Mr. Sturgill? You might start by learning to tell it from paint. A man laughed, not at her this time. Then another. The sound turned, the way a herd turns, and it turned against Vance Sturgill, who went red, and then white, and then got on his fine painted horse, and rode out of his own town's fair, with the laughter following him, the way it had once followed her. And Reuben Cade stood in the middle of it with his heart too full for his chest, and looked at his wife, and did not care one thing about the crowd. He waited until they were driving home in the blue dusk, the fair behind them, before he said it. I've a confession, Marta. He kept his eyes on the team. When I rode away for a wife, I told myself it was for the help. The place needed hands, and I'm no kind of man for courting. And I figured plain and practical would suit us both, and neither of us would expect the moon. He swallowed. That was a lie, I told myself, and I only found it out today, watching you stand there. I didn't marry you for the help. I married you because your letters were the truest thing I ever read, and I've spent all these months telling myself a man like me had no business hoping for more than a partnership. He drew rein at the crest of the road, where the whole of his ranch lay spread below them in the last light, the horses grazing, the smoke rising, the house she had made a home. I love you, plain as I know how to say it. Not your hands, not your worth to the ranch, not the money the horses bring. You, and I've been a coward not to say it these 3 months. Marta Vane sat very still on the wagon seat. In 29 years no one had ever said such a thing to her, and she had built her whole steady dignity on never once expecting them to, and she found the ground of that dignity shifting under her into something warmer and more frightening and better. I heard the town laugh the day I stepped down, she said, when she could speak. I heard it, and I made up my mind it wouldn't touch me, because I was sure it was only saying out loud what every man had always thought. She turned to him. You said I was better looking than my letters. I thought you were being kind, to spite them. It took me till just now to understand you meant it. Her big hand found his on the reins. I love you too, Reuben Cade. I have since the coach step, when you carried my bag through there laughing, like it weighed nothing. I only never let myself say it, for fear you'd think the plain one had gotten above herself. The plain one, Reuben said, and he lifted her big capable hand and pressed his lips to the back of it, right there on the wagon seat, with his whole ranch watching. There's not a soul in this territory can call you that again where I can hear it. You're Marta Cade. You're the best thing that ever came up that road, and the whole of Dry Fork's going to spend the next 40 years finding it out. They drove on down into the dusk together, the woman the town had mocked and the man who had seen her true. And behind them, in the far paddock, the ruined blood bay lifted its scarred head and watched them come, and did not shy, because it had learned, over a long, patient autumn, the thing the whole town was only starting to learn, that here at last were the hands that could be trusted, and the home worth trusting them.